In the last lecture, we learned how we can subscribe to our params to update them or to react to any changes to them and update our page if we already are on that page. Now we set up this subscription using observables and this works fine and you don't have to change anything here. I want to bring something to your attention though. The fact that you don't have to add anything else to this component here simply is because Angular does something for you in the background which is super important. It cleans up this subscription you set up here whenever this component is destroyed. Because if it wouldn't do this, what are you doing here? You're subscribing to parameter changes, and let's say you then leave this component, and later you come back. Well, once you left, this component will be destroyed, and when you come back, a new one will be created. But this subscription here will always live on in memory, because it's not closely tied to your component. So if the component is destroyed, the subscription won't. Now, it will be here because Angular handles this destroying of the subscription for you. But theoretically, you might want to implement the onDestroy lifecycle hook, importing it from @Angular core. Therefore, you have to implement ng onDestroy. And then you could store this subscription here in some property. Let's name it params subscription, which will be of type subscription. And subscription needs to be imported from RxJS subscription. RxJS is the package offering all this observables functionality. As I mentioned, it's not shipping with Angular, but Angular is using this package. So this type here, this subscription, this param subscription property is now bound to this subscription we're setting up here when calling subscribe. This returns us this subscription. And once the component gets destroyed, we could now access the subscription and unsubscribe. And again, because it's important, you don't have to do this. You can leave it as it was before, because Angular will do this for you regarding these route observables. But if you add your own observables, and I will come back to this in the observables section following this section, you have to unsubscribe on your own. And I just wanted to bring it to your attention because it's always super important to understand what's happening behind the scenes. Again, it's not necessary here, but it doesn't hurt to also do it manually too here. It won't add anything bad to your app by doing it like this. In the last lecture, we learned how we can retrieve our route params. That's awesome, and this is super important and something you will probably use a lot. Now, there are more things you can add to your URL though. You might have query parameters. These are the parameters separated by a question mark, like mode equals editing, anything. And you can have multiple ones separated with @signs. The question now is how can you pass them using Angular links, router links, and how can you then retrieve them? You might also have a hash fragment, so separated with the hash sign, to jump to a specific place in your app, loading, for example. Or maybe you don't really want to use this to jump there. You would have to add this scroll down there behavior on your own. Maybe you just want to retrieve it to use it as some extra information. Let's take a closer look at how we can pass this extra information on our links, both when using the router link directive and the navigate method in code, and how we can then retrieve that information. Let's start by passing it first. Let's say in our app module, we want to add more routes. For our servers here, we also want to add one other route, and that would be the route which allows us to edit a certain server. So we might load a server with some ID and then have /added at the end to describe in the URL what will happen in this component. And here it would be the added server component we want to load. So we added this new route, which should load this component in this added server file. Now, to be able to load this route on my servers component here, I want to hook up these links here in this list. We still have to do the same for the users component later. So here, I will add my router link and I will use the squared bracket syntax again so that I can pass an array here because I want to go to /servers. Then let's say server with ID 5. We will soon learn how to make this more dynamic. And then also add it. So this is this newly created route I want to call in this case. If we save this and we go to servers and click on this, you see we loaded service 5 edit, and the same for every link, of course. Again, I will change this soon. Now let's say we also want to have some query parameter deciding on whether we are allowed to edit the server or not. So we want to add this question mark, and we don't do it by adding question mark equals something here as another element in this array. Instead, when using a link in a template, we add a new property of this router link directive. We can bind to the query params property. Now, query params, and that's important, is not a new directive. It's just another bindable property of the router link directive. And here we have to pass a JavaScript object, and on query params, we can now define key value pairs of the parameters we want to edit. So for example, say allow edit here and set this to 1. Now let's see what happens if we now click this link. If we now click any link here, you see we have question mark allow edit 1 here. So that's this key value pair we set up in this object. And of course you could have more key value pairs here, which would then be separated with the and sign in between in your link. So that's the query params property. We also have the fragment property, and that is only fragment because you may only have one fragment. Here you could simply pass a string with single quotation marks, or therefore omit the squared brackets and set this to, let's say, loading. So if we now save this, we go back to the server's page, now you see we have hash loading at the end. This is how you can add a fragment. So super easy to add in our router link here in our template. Let's now see how we can do the same programmatically. So in our home component, where we already have this load servers button, let's say we want to load server 1. So here I will change this name to load server and pass 1 as an argument maybe. Adjust this method here, load server, and the ID will be passed as an argument as we just saw. And here I therefore want to navigate to servers, pass the ID. We're already seeing how this gets more dynamic. Now we're not hard coding 5 or something like this. We're using this argument here instead. And then as a last argument, edit. Now again, we still want to add query params and this fragment. So here in the navigate method, we use this object we already saw, where we already added relative to. Now I don't need relative to here. Instead here, I can also set up my query params. And that again is then just a JavaScript object where we say allow edit and set this to 1 maybe. And just as I added query params, I can also add the fragment here and set this to loading. Now with this, if we save this and we go back to our home page and click load server, you see we add the query parameter, allow edit and set it equal to 1, and the hash fragment here. So that is how we can use query parameters and fragments on both the programmatical routing approach, calling it from the TypeScript code, or on the router link like here. Now let's also learn how we can retrieve the data thereafter. In the last lecture we learned how we can pass query parameters and fragments. Now let's make sure we can also retrieve them. So we're loading this added server component in the end. So that is probably where we want to retrieve that information. We can easily do this by going there, added server component, and you see there already is a lot of code in there. Well, everything what's happening here, however, is it's using our service to get the server with the ID 1 and to be able to update it. And definitely dive into this service file if you want to learn more about what's happening here. It's super simple though. We simply are able to get this array of servers, get a single server, or update a single server, so overwrite it. So that's not the interesting part. The interesting part in the added server component here is how we can get access to our query parameter and the fragment. We need our activated route for this. So let's inject it just like we did before. Activated route needs to be imported from the @Angular router package. So make sure to add this import at the top. And with this added, and let's say ng on init, we can retrieve our query parameters and the fragment. And just like before, there are two ways of retrieving it. For the first approach, we can simply access the snapshot of our route and access query params here or our fragment. Just like that. Now this might bring the same problem as with the params. This is only run or updated at the time this component is created. So if there is a chance of changing your query params from the page you're currently on, you might not want to use this approach because it won't be reactive, it won't display or allow you to react to any changes which happen after this component has been loaded. So for now, let's use the snapshot though. And let's watch the console once this reloads. Notice we already have a query parameter and a fragment. And we see both here. This is our query parameter object, where we have this key value pair mapping again, allow added to 1. And this is just a bit broken, but here you see, if I make my console a bit broader, you see the loading hash fragment. So this is how you can retrieve it. The alternative, of course, is to use the route, and just like we had params as observable, we also have query params as an observable we can subscribe to, like this. And of course, we also have fragment as an observable we can subscribe to. So just like before, this will now allow you to react to changed query parameters. Now that's something we will use later in this module. For now, nothing will happen here, but it is important to keep in mind, like for params, you do have the same for query params and fragment. You don't need to unsubscribe here. Angular will handle it for you, just like it did for params. But this is how you can now get access to these extra features and how you can make sure that you don't miss the data.